All right, well, there's a lot of news going on in Palo Alto this week, despite it being the summer. And we're going to have our reporters roundtable where we each take a topic and discuss it. All we need is the roundtable, actually, to make this the true reporters roundtable. We'll talk about the CDC youth suicide report, changes with the VTA bus service, and a sneak preview of the city council election this fall. So Elena, let's start with you. The CDC has been doing an epidemiological study of suicides by youth, not just in Palo Alto, but countywide. And their early report, this is not the final, but the preliminary report was released this week. What are some of the highlights that struck you immediately about that?
Well, I think it's always, this is such a present and sort of nagging issue in Palo Alto, obviously, particularly. So it's just, I think, really good to have an objective report laying out some, definitely not all of the issues, some objective data comparing Santa Clara County to other local or statewide counties and even, across the nation, different suicide rates, precipitating factors that have been involved in some of the youth suicides locally. And I think it is important to note that while the Palo Alto School District was the body that sort of, they were the impetus for getting this study started, the Santa Clara County Public Health Department had to officially request this investigation. So it is a county-wide investigation. I think a lot of people are expecting it to really focus in on Palo Alto, and it's going to be a broader view, although there is some data specific to Palo Alto in this early report.
Yeah. This isn't the first attempt to get our hands on what exactly has been contributing to the suicides. There was a Stanford effort to do a kind of
sort of autopsies.
Sort of psychological autopsy. This is the first one that's come to fruition, I believe. And they didn't seize upon new data in order to get at these findings. It was a review of medical examiner reports,
some school district survey. But they've stressed that point. I think some people are missing it, and they're disappointed that, the CDC came in February, and they did meet with a lot of people who work very close on suicide prevention, youth mental health. They met with people from the school district, but it wasn't as if they came in and they interviewed, hundreds of high schoolers or sat down with families who had lost teens to suicide. So and they've been very upfront about that's what the report would be from the beginning. I think, some people were hoping that there was going to be more information like that was also new and had been gathered by these experts.
Yeah. So I think that one of the interesting things about the surveys, it kind of puts perspective onto both the suicide clusters that have happened here, but also the efforts that have been mounted to respond to youth suicides. Maybe we'll start with the comparison data: Palo Alto, Santa Clara, Gilroy, Eastside, Union, and San Jose. There's been a lot of media attention on Palo Alto. Palo Alto, the wealthy, perfect enclave. Why is it having these suicides? What did the comparison data show?
It actually showed that Palo Alto students seemed to be doing better than their peers at these other local school districts. The CDC researchers looked at survey data from this, it's called the California Healthy Kids Survey, which I believe is something like 5th, 7th, and 9th graders. It's not every single grade, every single year goes through, and they only looked at the high school data. And looking at students who had responded to questions asking if they had considered suicide in the previous year to taking the survey, and also if they had had serious mental distress, which meant something like you had felt consistently sad and hopeless for about 2 weeks. The numbers of students in Palo Alto who answered that question were far lower than in the other school districts, and even Eastside, Union, and San Jose, I don't forget their numbers, but they were really, really high. So while, it's not to say that Palo Alto doesn't have problems that need to be addressed, I think that a lot of people were a little bit comforted by the fact that despite all this media attention, as you said, we're not totally out of the norm here, and we're actually doing a little bit better than in some other places.
It also kind of struck me that Santa Clara County is doing a lot better than some of the other counties in California.
Yeah, really shockingly high numbers in Mendocino County.
It's like double or something like that.
Yeah.
Like Yuba County, Humboldt up north.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think was a big focus of the report is kind of the reasons for suicide attempts, and it's been obviously been a huge focus in the school district and around the city. And some of the reasons it gives as contributing factors include the kind of things we heard about: mental health issues, drug use, feelings of alienation. I'm curious whether there's anything here that really surprises you and that hasn't really been addressed already by the school district, and anything here that could potentially impact the district's response.
I don't think there are any huge surprises, and I think most people who I spoke to about the report felt that way too. It's not surprising, but it is good to just know that most of the youth who died by suicide locally had an existing mental health problem. Many of them had had a recent crisis within the 2 weeks prior to their death. So it just underscores something that is very well known, is that we need to be, or people who work with teens, whether it's teachers or parents or people in community organizations, need to know what behavior change looks like, or risk factors to look out for and how to respond to that. But I don't think that any of those sort of precipitating factors were too shocking or anything that would drastically change the approaches going on.
So it's mostly an affirmation document. It's basically saying,
I
telling
think
the school
so
district,
far.
keep doing what
Yeah.
you're doing. You probably don't need to.
Yeah, and I think that the
Change
final
course.
report, which is supposed to come out by the end of the year, will be much more detailed. I was just looking this morning at the CDC conducted the same kind of a study into suicide clusters in Fairfax, Virginia, and their final report is far more detailed, and it's probably what really people were hoping for and weren't going to get with the preliminary report. And there will also be stuff on analysis of media coverage. They had analysis of emergency department visits based on suicide attempts, just a much higher level of detail that might have more surprises or at least new information on how to guide efforts moving forward.
And any idea when that's coming out, the final report?
It's supposed to be end of the year, but one person in the county told me, "Don't hold your breath." This report was even a little bit later than they had said, so it's unclear, but definitely in a few months.
So Elena, when they've actually done these comparisons with other areas and they've found these higher numbers of kids who, let's say, were contemplating suicide or had feelings of depression, did they do a comparison of the actual numbers who actually attempted or actually killed themselves? And did Palo Alto kind of come out higher on that scale?
They didn't, and with the California Healthy Kids Survey, which they're getting this information from, these questions about mental distress and suicide are actually, it's called a module that school districts have to add. It's not built into the actual survey. So school districts have to choose to add it, and they haven't. I'm not sure about Palo Alto, but I was talking to someone yesterday who said that some school districts have also added it in some years and then not in the next year that they did the survey. So there's not consistent data around this. And there also it'd be hard to compare, anonymous survey answers to the number of death, the students who had actually died. So
Even though some of the findings, I think, were not out of the ordinary or not what was expected, I think that some of the people who read it, and you spoke with community leaders and school leaders this week, kind of saw that there are opportunities, that they really want to make sure that nobody is missing, opportunities to look at when a student is absent from school in particular. What is causing that? Not just to say, okay, well, he has or she has a legitimate excuse, but how is that person really doing? And can we step in there at that time? That kind of struck me about what Superintendent Max McGee was saying. Also, the role of adults in kids' lives. Those who had answered that survey and had not considered suicide or did not think of themselves in those drastic terms, 60% said they had an adult who played an important role in their lives or that they felt they could trust, versus 40% of those who were considering suicide.
yeah.
So it's interesting that even without, and I think some of the leaders were saying this as well, even without sort of a magic bullet, which we're not going to get, it did kind of point to various areas of opportunity besides the general, let's boost mental health, let's make sure people are connected, opportunities to act.
Yeah, and I think, Ken Dauber, school board member Ken Dauber, had a good point of when you're reading this report, whether you're a school board member, a student, a mental health professional, you should read it within the lens of what lever or area that I have control over can we affect change on, and so no one should read this as just an affirmation of yes, we're on the right track, but sort of, and I like that idea of just everyone within their own spheres needs to address this in a certain way, and everyone has to do it collectively, and so reading it within that context is important.
So there is a youth collaborative in Palo Alto, Project Safety Net, that is going to look at this report and discuss it. That's coming up pretty soon?
Yes, July 27th, they'll be having a meeting to go over the report. So.
Okay. And people can attend this meeting?
Yeah, it's a public meeting. Certainly, people who are interested in talking about it and hearing more should go to that.
Okay. I think there's an RSVP in your article.
There is.
From today. So, okay, thanks a lot. We're going to move on to the Valley Transportation Authority, an organization that has a broad reach and some money challenges. There was a meeting recently in which they discussed concept plans for how to change the system and possibly shrink coverage in Palo Alto. So Sue, tell us a little bit about where they're at, because they are very adamant, I would say, about not saying we are planning to cut service in Palo Alto. They are presenting concept plans. So what is this?
Well, there's kind of a two-pronged thing that VTA will be asking Palo Altans for, and one is certainly the half a cent sales tax increase that they want to have. That'll be on the November ballot, and that would generate about $6.25 billion for transportation projects. Some of that money would come back to Palo Alto in terms of be like roads, road repairs, things like that. But since Palo Alto's already done a lot of its own work on that, that money could be used for improving things like shuttle buses and that kind of transportation. The other aspect of this is that they had a May 18th public meeting, and they put out what they said were concept plans, very loose plans that would show if you had a certain percentage of ridership versus a certain percentage of coverage, what that would look like. And the reason they want to do that is because their formulas show they've got, so far right now, they have a 13% fare box recovery rate. That means when you get on and you put your money in the box, how much revenue are they generating by that? It's only about 13%.
So the expenses of the system, only 13% is being paid by the passengers?
Exactly, yes. And so one of the things they want to do is to raise that. They feel they have to raise that rather than depend so much on subsidies, basically. And so they looked at basically what we currently have is about 70% ridership versus 30% coverage in terms of how many people are on those buses. And that's just overall throughout the entire system, how they would look at it. Then they say, okay, if it's 80%, if we have 80% ridership in our buses versus 20% coverage, what does that look like? And then the most drastic one is 90%, which I think they would really like to have, rub their hands together and have some good revenue numbers versus 10% coverage. So for Palo Alto, that means essentially if they were to do the 90% one, they would knock out everything that feeds within the city itself. So you would not have the 88 line or the 89 line or the 35 line, the one that goes basically from Middlefield down to the Mountain View Transit Center. And some of these lines are ones that residents have fought very hard for, in particular the 88, to not lose, because that's the one that serves veterans and students going to Gun High School. And so that's one of the issues that they've had is in this model, everything would be knocked out essentially, except for the line 22 and the 522, which basically just go from Palo Alto's transit center down to San Jose and back.
So will Palo Alto have a say in this? Which options is being selected?
Well, they are saying at this point that Palo Alto does have a say in this in terms of just they're putting out these plans and they're gathering feedback from everybody. But how that translates in terms of whether they'll listen to that feedback is another story.
So they can comment, but they won't have a say into what's being implemented.
Well, yeah, there's no vote on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing, first of all, I applaud the VTA in trying to think about the fare box revenue, because the 13% is like really, really abysmal. It's like near rock bottom.
Right.
I mean, just for comparison, say Caltrain's fare box recovery is like 64%.
Wow.
It's been higher than 60% for a while. Like San Francisco Muni, granted, San Francisco's got a lot more density, but it also has a lot more buses. It's about 35%. It's considered kind of meh. So 13% is like low. But in terms of how to fix it, I mean, it seems to me that there's various ways you could do it. You could do a better job marketing. You could actually make it a viable system so people would want to ride it. Or you could basically lop off everything that does not go to San Jose, which is apparently what VTA is thinking about. So, I mean, that obviously would have a huge influence on Palo Alto. But the one question that I keep on asking myself, which I don't understand, is why are they doing this now, right as they're asking Palo Alto to vote on their sales tax? I mean, you're raising money for new transit. You're asking Palo Alto, please help us raise money for transit. And then you're telling them we're going to knock off all your buses except the ones that go to San Jose.
Well, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because that question was raised at the May 18th meeting by a number of residents, because the plan that they plan to, after they've gathered all of this data and give the information and gather all the information from the public, they plan to come up with their draft concept, meaning the ones that they're taking seriously to move forward in December. So that would be after the election. So a number of people have
Wouldn't that
been very
make one
concerned.
even more cynical? Like,
Yeah, I think a lot of people were very cynical about that.
And the VTA didn't consider this the timing issue.
They didn't say anything about it.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting that the BART stations down in South County are going to come online in 2017. So I think that is one impetus for
Yes.
taking a look at the system. And probably there was a debate between, should we just figure out what we're going to do down there and not involve the whole system, or should we just open it up right now since we're planning anyway?
Well, that was the idea that they talked about when I interviewed them. They said, basically, we're looking at something like 26,000 more rides. I think it was like day or something, where they were going to have all these people flooding in, and they would be inundated. And how do you get them basically from the BART station to where they need to go? And so they're looking basically at, while they've studied that, they said, let's do an overhaul of the entire system. Because we normally do it in bits and pieces every couple of years. We take a segment, or we just look at something and we present it to, the VTA board, and we say, well, what do you think of this? And they vote yay or nay. And that's it. But they have not really, restructured and kind of looked at even the other pressures that are around them, how are they going to link up to, let's say, Caltrain, or what's the impact of something like Uber and Lyft? So these are all things they have to look at.
Yeah, partnerships and the entire transit ecosystem is a really interesting topic that Palo Altans have been talking about. Like, there shouldn't be redundancy, obviously. If you've got VTA going one route, why would you have the Palo Alto shuttle going another route? And I think that is something that I don't have a huge confidence that all the agencies are really talking together. It seems from some of your interviews that people have had discussions, but where's the consortium? Where's the, collaborative in which all these agencies, Caltrain, Shuttle, Uber, bike share, are actually thinking about first mile, last mile kinds of issues and who's going to take what part. And maybe that's just a difficult conversation to have.
Well, I think
really.
that, it's like in any large organization, and government agencies are often like this. They're siloed and they don't really talk to each other. And I think when you're trying to talk cross-agency, you have an even greater issue that way. And people's schedules, they don't want to maybe change their timing, and is their system working for them to bring out the greatest amount of revenue. So some residents have talked about the need for a so-called pulse system, which is like something they did in Zurich, where they got something like 42 transit agencies, and they said, every single one of you have to get together and figure out how to make this work.
So that seems like a bit of a moonshot,
Yeah.
considering
Yes.
the California's situation. And I think
VTA doesn't think that could work at all.
I don't think there's just too many agencies, and I think it's the problems you just mentioned. I believe are extremely valid, and they're even more valid in Palo Alto because Palo Alto is at the very north of the county. The VTA is dominated by San Jose and some of the other members, so they don't really have that much incentive. They don't really have constituents here, so which makes it more troubling. And there's obviously a long history of tax money going to benefit BART and other projects that will come to Palo Alto.
Well, I think that they've also looked at, they've even mentioned that they basically, if you're in the wealthier area, the affluent areas will suffer more because they have more options. So they don't, when they
Options
don't,
meaning driving, which the VTA is trying to discourage by.
or even
Using
the
buses.
funding, for example, you've got the Palo Alto shuttle. Well, the Palo Alto shuttle is a great thing.
Three
It's
buses.
in some way, but they look at that as a starting point for the conversation to say, we can nix you because you've got something in place, and you're even talking about expanding it because Palo Alto did their shuttle survey and they are talking about expanding their shuttle.
Okay,
Well-
so if Palo Alto tries to improve the situation by expanding shuttles, the VTA is going to kind of cancel that out by reducing its service.
Yes.
Doesn't make that much sense to
Yeah,
me.
they're saying it's redundancy then. If Palo Alto steps up to the plate and other cities develop their own, let's say, intra-city transit systems, then they don't see any reason why they should expand theirs.
I think
They're
there's a
better off.
funding
Focus on
issue
county
here,
as
though.
opposed to-
I mean, if VTA is taking a certain percent of the taxes for countywide transit,
Right.
and understanding that transit that benefits the county overall does in some ways benefit Palo Alto, but the funding question becomes, if we give our taxes to VTA, can some of those taxes come back? And can some of those taxes be used for the intra-city, shuttle service? Because,
Right.
I mean, I'll be a devil's advocate. I mean, conceptually, I don't see any problem with having the Palo Alto shuttle take care of Palo Alto's needs because, first of all, it's under our control. Second of all, we can run kids back and forth from Gun to to Midtown probably better than the VTA can. I mean, VTA is taking it right now, but I mean, if we can identify specifically what Palo Alto needs, then I think we would be able to respond a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And change things
yeah.
as needed, whereas changing the VTA.
Well, I think that's part of what VTA they kind of want both sides of it in a certain sense. They want to relinquish the responsibility for local transit connections.
But they want the local funds, right?
Yes,
making
yes,
sure.
exactly.
So,
Yes,
okay.
that's what we're
Have their
talking
cake
about.
and eat too.
Yes, exactly. But I think they one of the things that's been floated, certainly by Palo Alto and I believe other cities as well, is to take some of that tax revenue and that VTA should give it back to the cities for the purpose of developing their own intra-city shuttles, and that has worked in Los Angeles. LA Metro apparently did this, is what I was told by VTA when I went to interview them. And it worked. They gave billions of dollars to local cities to develop their own systems. One of the things they argued against, they said one of the failings of it is that it was not easy for users to use because you had maybe 100 different agencies. But that's it. But most people, how far are you traveling? Are you going to all of these different places? You're probably just going to go local, and then you're, just like people are doing now. They're just kind of need their shuttles for, their buses for certain connections within the city, and then a few outside of it as well.
So I'm curious, how big of a problem are new transportation options like Lyft and Uber, even private bus commute, shuttle routes, things like that?
Yeah, VTA didn't have any solid numbers on that outside of saying that, as an example to show how much revenue they are losing. If you didn't have these private shuttle bus services going to like Google and those types of places, those people would represent another 15% increase in their bus ridership for VTA. So that's a significant number right there. And branding is, in a report that their consultants did, the branding is a really big part of one of the aspects that they think that VTA needs to engage in. And that also is the case for Palo Alto Shuttle as well. People don't even know it's there in the city. The city's own survey showed that the people said, I don't even really know what's there. I don't know how I can use it. I don't even know where it is. We see these buses around, but we don't really know anything about them. So, I think ridership would increase if you have an increase in knowledge about how can I use this.
I just wanted to toss in some numbers into this conversation just so we have some perspective. So the 22 and the 522, which run along El Camino from Palo Alto down to San Jose, they have monthly boardings, 12,000, nearly 500 for 22, and then 6,000 for the 522, so that is roughly 19,000 passengers who board in Palo Alto. By comparison, the 35 is the most popular sort of within Palo Alto route. They have an average ridership of 9,000 a month. And then it drops precipitously. The 88, which goes from basically Midtown, the residential part of Midtown, to Gunn High School in Rastradero, that's 2,500 riders a month. And then the 89, which is from Cal Ave to the Research Park and the VA hospital, is 1,200 riders a month.
So some of these numbers are underwhelming, and though I think they bring context and kind of help explain the VTA's decision, I don't think we should put like all our decision making into these. I mean, when you look at Gunn High School, when the kids are coming out of schools, the few that aren't biking, like I'm sure a lot of them would be using the bus there than in other hours. So there would be this critical function in an area that already has colossal traffic congestion. And another thing, I think there is a bit of a kind of hazard with the VTA completely treating this like a business decision as opposed to like a public service that should be provided to residents who may not be living in the densest parts of the city. So I hope these things are taken into consideration as much as the numbers you just cited.
Yeah.
Well, some of the discussion that they've also said is that they don't look at it entirely as a business decision because they know that there are some outlying areas or areas where people are really in need, underserved areas where people are living in poverty, where there's a lot of, let's say, might be senior communities of that nature that really can't do without the bus service. So they will always operate some buses at a deficit to themselves.
The high school doesn't fit into that category?
I don't
Gunn
think
High?
so. No, we're talking once again about affluence and
So
that-
dry
that's-
folks. Okay. Dry folks, the VTA says.
Yeah, well, they're saying, well, the other thing they look at, for example, is that Palo Alto has like one of the highest rates of bicycle use. I think it's like 9% of transportation is done by bike in Palo Alto. And it's the highest, I think, in the county. So when you look at they're looking at those numbers as well. They're looking at what are the alternative routes of transportation that people are using in different cities. And in more affluent communities, they simply are doing other things. So they just think, well, we're not needed as much there.
Well, ceding your territory is one thing, but I mean, it seems like the better approach is not to cede your territory so much as partner with, just so that you make sure that coverage is actually happening and that people are able to get around.
And that's one of the things they say, loosely, that they are in conversation with partners that they want to have. And one of the things that was pointed out as well is that some other places, like I believe it's in Pinellas County, Florida, their bus services are partnering with like cabs and other ride-hailing services to take care of those first and last miles.
Well, a very sticky topic that will no doubt be with us for a while. I'll be interested to see if it plays into the election this November, besides or beyond the VTA tax itself. Let's transition real quick to that, because I know we're running out of time. Gennady, what is the scuttlebutt, the word on the street about who's going to run for council this fall? We've got four coming off.
We've been hearing 5 names.
Yeah.
The fact that we're running out of time is not a big deal because 0 people have declared so far. So everything I'm saying is unofficial. We're speculating. This is innuendo. This is rumor. This is the New York Times reporting yesterday that Pence will be a vice president pick of Donald Trump, which did happen. So I guess we can go ahead with it.
There's some credibility there.
Yeah. So, but all of these names I've heard from multiple people, including council members, community activists, people like and none of them have denied, except for Don McDougal I haven't spoke to, but the other 4 I've had discussions with and asked them, and they didn't say they're running, they didn't say they're not running. We're exploring, but other people have told me, yeah, watch out. Well, first of all, let's go with the incumbents. There's 4 seats open. 2 people are terming out, Pat Burton, Greg Schmidt. Mark Berman is presumably not running for another term because he's in the primary for the state assembly, which leaves Liz Niss's seat, and she's widely expected to run. I've corresponded with her this week. She said she's still exploring. She's told many people she is running, and I'm pretty sure she'll be running, but she hasn't confirmed that yet.
Yep.
Let's see, 2 names that probably won't surprise too many people that keep on reemerging from everybody I speak to. Arthur Keller, Lydia Koo. I associate both of them with kind of the residentialist side of the equation. Keller is a long-time Planning Transportation Commission member, very active in civic issues. He was in Sue's VTA story because of his work in bringing buses to Gun High. So very wonky, very knowledgeable,
Yeah.
So
Long time civic service.
yeah, and Lydia Koo, of course, ran last time. Barely was defeated by Corey Walbach by just like a few dozen votes for the last spot. And so she's expected to run again. I mean, she's been attending the meetings regularly, speaking out on issues relating to development, the Maybell saga she's been heavily involved in.
Yeah,
So-
she comes really from the neighborhood perspective.
Yeah, and yeah, also really well known for her work in in emergency preparedness and kind of diversity, kind of all the things she's been doing in Barron Park and community events. Another name that's been popping up quite a bit is Greg Tanaka, longtime planning
another
commissioner and
neighborhood person as well.
former chair. He used to be president of College Terrace Board, but I don't think he's quite as involved in the neighborhood as some of the other people in College Terrace, like Fred Valens. He is not as associated with any ideology. I think he's very kind of data-based, very kind of
Pragmatic.
technical. Yeah, kind of in the middle. Again, he hasn't told me that he's running. He hasn't told me that he's not. And I already mentioned Don McDougall, who might be.
Yeah, that's a new name for me.
He's been described to me by one person as this election's A.C. Johnson. It's kind of like the person who's kind of supportive of many of the establishment people in Palo
Okay.
Alto, is kind of a moderate voice. But he has done some civic service in the last few years. I think his first commission appointment was to the Library Advisory Commission. And right now he's also serving on this really giant, like 20-plus member committee that's working to update the comprehensive plan. So
That's getting into the nitty-gritty.
yeah, so I expect he'd be really good at kind of like answering questions about what's happening in the city because he has been very engaged recently, but probably not as well known as the other four names I mentioned just before.
Okay.
Again, all rumors, all non-confirmed, but we'll see what we can do about that in the next few weeks.
Exactly.
No, we do know someone who won't be running this year.
Is that-
The late Victor Frost.
Oh yeah, rest in peace, Victor Frost.
Yes, a perennial candidate. So 5 names at least, 4 open seats.
And I expect there will be a lot more between now and August 12th.
Yeah, the filing period is just opened.
Yeah,
So we'll close.
and if Liz Nist does not decides not to run, then the deadline will be August 17th.
It's true, it's extended if the incumbent doesn't run. So this is the last election before the council shrinks. So in 2018, we're going to go from 9 to 7. Let's see, at that point, there'll be 2 who are termed out and then 3 giving up seats. So 3 people coming out, but only 1 seat available, I guess. Out of theirs, yeah. Anyway, we'll do the math in 2 years.
I'm still barely trying to keep up with 2016.
We'll deal with it when it comes. Okay, well, thanks all for a good discussion on many different topics this week. And we'll see what turns up in the weeks ahead. To check out all the news on Palo Alto Online, go to paloaltoonline.com. If you'd like to talk about any of these topics, go to paloaltoonline.com/square for our Town Square Forum. That's it for Behind the Headlines this week. We'll see you next week.